For today's class, we are mainly going to look at data quality management. But just before we look at that, I promised us an assignment, and I just wanted to verify with us if it is okay for us to have it presented on the 8th of March. That is next week, I think on Tuesday. I know it is a public holiday, but I would require just 20 minutes of each group's time. If this is okay with you, kindly raise your hand so that we can see how many of us are willing to come on the 8th. Not necessarily come, but I will be online, and all you need to do as a group, check your time slot, be there. It will take us about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we shall be done. Okay, those are 2 hands out of the 27 of us. Okay. Four hands. Should I pass it as a directive? Okay. 5, thank you. Yes, 8th March put in. We're talking about, it's a public holiday. I just need 15 to 20 minutes of your time online. So I'm going to put time slots for the different groups. So you just come in and you're able to present. Think about it as we go along. I will ask again so that we don't spend a lot of time on this, but just think about it. That's my plan, such that we don't lose the time. So I will wait for us to give me feedback on that. So by afternoon, I will put up the schedule, the questions, as well as the schedule for 8th March presentation. That's for the day class as well as the evening class. Okay. Let me just share my screen. Please confirm to me that you are able to see my screen. Thank you, Edgar and team. Okay. So today's class, we are focusing on data quality management. Last week, Edgar, did you just forget your hand up, or you have a clarification to make? Okay, thanks. So last week we looked at database security, and we mentioned it is one So We looked at database security last week, and we mentioned it's one of the important things that need to be done in an organization, mainly because data is an important resource for individuals in an organization, because this is what gives you a basis to make decisions, and also the fact that it gives you the competitive advantage over your competitors. So if it is not well protected, that simply means you will end up having a scenario where others you're not breaking even, or you can be manipulated. And so it is important to keep your data secure. And we looked at the fact that there are three major concepts that need to be put into consideration. That's confidentiality, which we looked at in conjunction with privacy, making sure that your data does not fall in the hands of unauthorized users. And we also want to protect the identity of individuals within the data that is in question. The other aspect we looked at integrity. Here we mentioned that the goal of integrity is to ensure that your data is accurate as it should be correct, or the validity can be trusted. And we said this hinges to the aspect of data quality, and there are many more aspects that are related to data quality. What makes the data of quality, or what is that you would be looking at to say that, wow, yes, the integrity of this data can be trusted based on certain characteristics. And these are the ones we will be looking at today. Lastly, the thing that we mentioned but didn't have time to look at was the availability of the database system, which simply looks at the aspect to ensure that data can be accessed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And here we are looking at aspects of backing up, making sure you back up regularly to make sure that in case you have failure occurring, you can go back to your backup together with your transaction logs. Transaction logs are simply a noting of everything that has happened to the system. Who logged in, what did they do, what did they access, and what changes were made. And once you have record of this, you will be able to bring your system back up and running. So those were the aspects that we looked at last week. And today we want to focus on the quality of data, what it is. We want to be able to mention what it is, what are the characteristics involved? Is it critical? What aspects of data quality tools need to be put into consideration? When it comes to management, what does it mean and what challenges are faced therein? And once we are done with that, I mentioned last week that the practical aspects or the mechanisms that are put in place to support these concepts will be handled by Dr. Ndivatia when he comes into class. And I hope that he will be able to, we will start the practical sessions next week. If all goes well, we will divide our time in such a way that I will teach 2 hours and he will take up the other 2 hours, such that we can be able to balance between the theory and the practical aspects. So, what is data quality? Let's begin from a layman's perspective, or what you imagine, or what what you would consider as being quality with regards to data in any organization. What would you say offhand? What is data quality? We can make use of the chat. Yes, Agnes. Job. If your official name is not what is showing, kindly rename yourself like Dell E6230. Please rename yourself to have an official name showing. Elisa, thank you, Godfrey. Godfrey says data quality is the measure of how well suited a data set is to serve its specific purpose. Great try, yes. So here are things that come out. We are looking at purpose of the data, and we look at the suitability. Anybody else? About how we're looking at accuracy and more. We need to find out what the more is. Simon says it's the value that the data holds. Okay, we need to be able to define what we mean by value. Okay. Powell says it is the state of qualitative or quantitative pieces of data. I wonder what we mean by state as a new word. We have authenticity of data, data being able to fulfill purpose. Thank you, Natasha. Okay, great. Thank you for your participation. So we're saying data quality implies accuracy, as was mentioned by one of us. Thank you, Elisa. Again, she brings the aspect of purpose. So Sechiranda mentioned that it is accuracy and more. In other words, we want the data to be, for every record, remember in the database, you have particular data items that you are keeping, or characteristics that we keep about a particular data object in the real world. So if we are talking about a student, we have different occurrences of students. But when we pick out one student, that is a single occurrence, we want to ensure that the characteristics or the values that we have provided for the different attributes actually correctly describe a particular instance. For example, when we talk about names, when you pick, if you came to the Department of Information Systems and you were looking for me, you would need to accurately say that I'm looking for Amiyo. Okay, currently I'm the only Amiyo, and so if you came with a different name, you would find they would lead you to another lecturer rather than me. So the attribute name needs to correctly describe me as an individual lecturer. You need to look for Mercy Amiyo. Okay, so that is about accuracy. When we look at all the values that you provided for each attribute in a record, do they correctly identify or describe that particular entity instance? If so, then we go further to say that data quality goes a step ahead to look at the usage of those data items by different users. In other words, when you put together the description of Mercy, depending on the characteristics, say name, her gender, her qualification, and her department, can I be able to use this data for decision making, maybe for planning or operational use? If we are looking for lecturers who teach databases, can I look at the qualifications of the different staff members and be able to select a suitable set of lecturers who can actually deliver on the database course? That is for decision making, planning, as well as operation. So we want to ensure that data items are fit for the purpose they were intended. Every data, all data that we store, we said it's a valuable resource because it needs to help in decision making. And so we are saying that it should be in the format that will enable us to actually make decisions. If you want to know who can be able to teach machine learning, from their qualifications, you should be able to tell this one is suitable, this one is not suitable. What are their areas of specialization? So a data item should be as the user expects to observe it. In other words, represent the real world object correctly. And so we are saying, not only are we looking at the data item itself, say the name or your age or your gender, but we want to be able to look at the whole set of data that has been stored in the database. Can we be able to look at it in wholesomeness, the whole collection of the characteristics for each single instance, and say, yes, it is accurate and it can be used for its purpose? We do not want a scenario, for example, where Mercy Amiyo is correct for the name, but when it comes to gender, you have assigned her a male. So in that case, yes, we have data correct for the name, but when you go to the attribute gender, it is in the right, it's one of the acceptable values, but it is incorrect. So in that case, it becomes unusable for the intended purpose. For example, if you wanted to know how many female lecturers are there versus men, to know the ratio, you will end up having wrong results, because when you look at the interpreted data, there are gaps or inconsistencies therein. So data quality looks at accuracy, its use, and not just for one data item, but we look at the data in entirety. We look at the whole integrated set of attributes. So it brings us to the aspect of the degree of excellence. Excellence is about a couple of attributes that help us to define what we actually mean. If you have these aspects, say completeness, the validity, the consistency, the timeliness, the accuracy of data, if these put together the values for each of these individual factors, make it suitable for its use. That means we have excellent data. So we need to consider the totality of the features that the data bears in order for us to be able to determine the excellence or say this is the quality of the data we have. It is 100% okay, or it is just 50% excellent. In other words, some of the data is actually dirty. And when we talk about dirty data, that means it has an unacceptable value with regard to its quality or its excellence. And most times, if we have mistakes here and there, that means you don't have the real representation of the different instances. That means the users start doubting, they have no confidence, and therefore even the decisions that are made based on that data will be refuted. And that is why we are saying anytime we have dirty data, it's one of the top reasons why you will have failure within a given data center. So it's very paramount for us to look at these different factors and make sure that for each we have an acceptable value. So looking at accuracy versus quality, whereas accuracy is looking at a particular instance within the database, we are saying quality does not look at just the data item, but we would like to ensure it is fit for the purpose for which the different users need it for. Secondly, we look at accuracy in terms of the database technology. If you are using MySQL, if you're using Oracle, if you're using SQL Server, we are saying there are certain aspects within the technology in how you would define a given data element. Whereas when you're looking at, you have to satisfy that on the database side. And that means you are accurate. However, on quality, we go beyond that. Yes, satisfy those terms with regard to the technology you're using, but we should also ensure that specific aspects of the business are actually being satisfied. If I am a company that looks out to sell data, like the ISPs that you have, the MTN, the communication people, their data needs to show them how many people are using data, which packages are they using most, and so they tailor the kind of services they will send out based on that whole spectrum of the kind of data they are storing, because that is what their business is. If you go to a supermarket, there is a certain set of data that they would like to keep. What are the most common items that are bought by users? And if a user buys bread, do they usually buy it with Blue Band? Do they usually buy it with jam? What are the related things that they usually buy? So they look at the trends of what particular items did they buy together in order to make decisions. So we are saying when it comes to quality, it's not just the item that you've stored in the data properly, that this was sold, these are the number of quantities that were sold, but they go wider to look at how to increase or to meet their business objectives. In data accuracy, we ensure that the data element conforms to the validity constraints. That means if it should not be duplicate, we ensure that the value supplied for a given instance of an entity is actually not duplicate, it is unique. While we look at on the quality side, having satisfied that, we want to ensure in the whole system we can identify each and every single item within the database. In accuracy, we ensure that the data types are correct, while in quality, we are looking at the form and the content. We look at ensuring that the data type is correct, but even the value makes sense. I gave us an example of gender. If you wanted, gender is a string, and so it may accept values male or female, F or M. So if you are considering accuracy, as long as you provide these two values, it is correct. However, when you go on the quality side, is the content actually correct for that particular instance? Is she male or is she female? We have to make sure that if somebody is male, we actually, yes, have the domain female or male, but the value is correct. So the form as well as content have to be consistent throughout the whole system. Whereas accuracy supports operational systems, that's the day-to-day aspects. We are saying when we look at quality, we even go a step ahead. Data warehousing brings the aspect of historical data and also futuristic. We want to look at history, what are the trends in order to make predictions for the future. So quality helps us evaluate the past, the present, for purposes of making plans and decisions for the future. And therefore we say it is very critical, as you can imagine, if I want to make predictions of introducing a new product on the market, I need to be able to trust that the data I have stored will guide me in making the right decision. And so if my data was of poor quality, that means, yes, you are conforming to data types, but it is incorrect here and there. That means I will end up having decisions made on wrong data or inaccurate data, which could lead to losses as well as loss of confidence. And therefore, it is very important to set procedures and systems that will be checks, provide checks for the different quality aspects that we are going to look at, for purposes of one, building the confidence of the people using the data, as well as the customers who you are serving. We also need to be able to reduce the risk of disastrous decisions. Instead of giving people a first class, you end up giving them a second lower. That is a very gross decision error, because someone may lose a job opportunity just because of the class of degree based on wrong data. So it is important to check that we have the right quality of data. Once we have good data, we enhance strategic decision making, improve productivity. That means you can do much more within the shortest time possible because you can streamline different processes, and we avoid compounding effects of data contamination. In other words, if we have heard of the ripple effect, if you had a mistake in data for us in that affects your final class of degree. That's just an example of a compounding effect of data that has been contaminated. So some of the characteristics that we have, it's about completeness of the data. Is it consistent? Is it precise, accurate, timely, and transparent? So we are going to look at each of these. We have endeavored to talk about accuracy, and this is mainly about the correctness of the data as per that given individual instance. So we look more at whether the content correctly or rightly describes an occurrence of an entity. And of course, it should satisfy the form or the format in which it should be, which links to the data domain integrity. I'm sure each one of us, hopefully, let me not say I'm sure, let me use the word I hope, I'm hopeful that we all remember the concept of an attribute domain. And somebody remind us, attribute domain. Anybody remembers?
Madam, good morning, madam.
Yes, Hamza.
Good morning.
Morning.
Attribute domain talks about attributes having a specific data type. Let me say if you have gender, or let me say if you are having salary has a data type of int, so you cannot use it with the data type of varchar, like attribute domain, yeah, something like that.
Okay, well tried. Jovan mentions that it is the acceptable values of an attribute. In other words, we specify the kind of expected values we would expect for a given attribute. What Hamza has spoken about relies much more on the data type. What kind of data do you expect to be held by a given attribute? So when we talk about domain integrity, we are simply saying that every value that is supplied for a given attribute should fall within the defined range or the acceptable values. If it is gender, we mention you're either male or female. Currently, we don't have, if we wanted to be more commonly, we have male and female. Others, we may, these days, if you want to go into those nitty-gritties, you can think of transgenders, or you can think of the hermaphrodites. But commonly, we know you're either male or you're female. And in that case, those are the acceptable values. So when it comes to domain integrity, it simply means for every supplied value for, say, a student, we need to check whether the gender is male or female. And when we come to the data types, we are saying you just need to be able to ensure that the values that are entered into that particular column match the defined data type. Is it a numeric value that takes integers only? Did we define that it should be able to take decimal numeric data, but with decimals? Then you have to check that. If it is a defined string, either it's varchar or it's char, all these are data types that enable us to define what we expect. Numeric or alphanumeric kind of data. The other aspect is about adherence to data integrity rules. And when we were looking at integrity, we mentioned constraints, or we mentioned data integrity rules, and we had 3 categories. We had the entity, we had the referential, as well as business rules. So we are saying that one of the indicators that you have high quality data is if those set rules are actually being satisfied. When we look at the entity, we mentioned that this really refers to the primary key. Can we be able to identify each and every entity? That simply means if you have a primary key, it should not be reducible, it should be unique, and it should not have null values. When we look at the referential, we are looking at the foreign key, that if there is a value supplied, it should match that which you are, the column, a value in the column that you are referencing or referring to. If there are business rules, are we able to satisfy them? For example, one business rule that we commonly look at is that we need to have paid our tuition before we sit exams, at least 60%. So there is a rule there. Have you paid 60%? If yes, then you are permitted to sit a certain number of exams. So adherence to data integrity rules is one of those high quality data indicators. Okay, the other is about data anomaly. And here we are saying a field should only be used for the purpose for which it was defined. We do not want to have scenarios whereby instead of providing an email address, you are providing for us a postal address. And yet we defined it as email address. Yes, they are all strings, so we expect that even though they are both varchar in terms of data type, there is a specific purpose. I expect an email address. So use it for that and not to provide a physical or a postal address. When we look at consistency, we are simply saying that the form and the content of data in a given field should be the same across multiple source systems. So wherever that information is being stored, it should have the same form and it should be the same in terms of content. Whether Amiyo is on the Mwele system or is being looked at in the ACMIS system, we expect that her name remains consistent, her gender remains consistent, her email address will remain consistent. It should be the same. Redundancy, we are looking at this as being an indicator that we do not have duplication of information within the system unnecessarily. When I mention unnecessarily, it simply means Simon is asking, what are source systems? Okay, just to clarify on that, I didn't want to introduce the word data warehouse, but I will still have to bring it in here. Look at a data warehouse as being a database, yeah, storage of data, but this data can come from different systems, yeah, and it's brought together, integrated in one place for you to be able to have a wholesome view of, say, the organization. So when we talk about a source system, we are just looking at where is the data feeding into this big database, which we're calling a data warehouse. Where is it coming from? It could be from ACMIS, it can be from Wele, it can be from the finance system if it exists, it could be from the payroll system, and so on and so forth. So all those individual systems that are feeding into one large enterprise system is referred to as source. I hope it is now clear, Simon. So in all those systems that feed into the one, we are saying there has to be consistency. That Amiyo Mercy in the payroll is the same Amiyo Mercy that you have on Wele, is the same Amiyo Mercy that is feeding in data for students in ACMIS, is the same student, so is the same staff member who has put information on Wele or on the data quality, the quality assurance system, that you're looking at the very same individual. And so when we look at redundancy, we want data not to be stored in many places unless we want to improve efficiency. Sometimes when data is, you have only one copy and you have multiple users, it becomes a little slower for processing of certain queries. So when we looked at normalization, I'm sure that you are told that here is where we try to minimize redundancy. However, highly normalized scenarios can have issues in performance. So sometimes you may need to introduce optimum levels of redundancy, as in have more than one copy, just for purposes of improving efficiency. As I mentioned, the key word here is optimum. We want to balance out. And I think when you'll be looking at database performance as a cost unit, these are some of the aspects that will come into play for discussion. Completeness is an indicator of whether you have missing values or not within the system. So we are saying we need to endeavor as much as possible to have complete data for each instance of an entity that we are storing. Keep as much information about Amiyo Mercy as the attributes that have been asked to define a staff member. Avoid having missing values. And that is the reason why, if you remember in your SQL in DIM 1, you had aspects of not null complaints. Sorry, the not null constraint being attached to attributes. And that not null constraint ensured that as long as that constraint is attached to a column, you must provide a value if you're inserting a record in a given table. And this is to ensure the completeness of the data. So if you don't enforce it, that means you'll have many missing values and the data has a tendency of getting its ability to address its purpose is reduced. We have duplication, that's why you have duplicate records across a system. And we are saying that just in case you have this, we need to be able to identify them, and we have a cross-reference created such that in case you make an update to one of the records, it has to be replicated wherever it actually exists in the system to avoid inconsistencies. Inconsistencies where in one place you have Amiyo as Mercy Amiyo Rebecca, and in another instance or system you have her as Mercy Amiyo per se. and you forget that there is a middle name. So if that update has been made in one of the systems, with a cross-reference, it helps to link to every other point where you have a duplicate record in order for you to make an update. Conformity to business rules, I have mentioned this as we are looking at data integrity constraints. So business rules are equivalent to enterprise constraints. We need to be able to adhere to those that have been defined. Usefulness, we are looking at it as the value that that data is providing for the users. And that value can only be ascertained if the requirements to perform different tasks are being satisfied. If you do not satisfy my needs to ensure that you have complete results, that means you should have at least 2 assignments for coursework and an exam mark. If these requirements are not satisfied, it is impossible for a student to actually pass a course unit. So it is important that we don't have missing marks by capturing all the relevant assignments. If a student does not have a particular assignment, we need to find out whether they did it. That's why there's a lot of registration that is done during assessments to ensure we have a record or a proof that you actually sat for it, and therefore there should be marks as well. Clarity, goes hand in hand with the meaning of data items, and we are saying it is important to ensure that the meaning of data items is clear to all users of the system. So this goes hand in hand with how have you named the different data items. So in one place, you may have FN, in another place, you have first name, in another one, you have F, and then name. The question is, do the users understand that all these different conventions for this attribute actually mean one and the same thing, first name? If not, that means there is ambiguity, and it is important to agree on what is the convention we will follow in naming the different attributes. The other indicators that exist are structural definiteness. This is where a data item can naturally be structured into individual components, and the item must contain this well-defined structure. An example is an address. It's made up of particular individual components, and without those components, you will not have a complete address. So it is important to define that every time, say I am talking about a postal address, I expect to have a box number and the city in which that box number is found. If I'm talking about an email, I need to be able to have the email address, but to be told Amiyo at a certain domain. If I don't have it, then I will not be able to see exactly where, as it won't be complete, and therefore it means there is a problem with the structure of that particular data item. So define, especially data items that have components, they should be well defined. When we talk about timeliness, we are simply saying that the data should be accurate depending on a given time. If we expect to hold data about daily sales, we should know what is the dimension that we are storing. So we should store data of sales in a given day. If we are looking at monthly sales, we should define that timeliness of that data so that everyone knows that either this data is a record of daily operations, monthly operations, weekly operations, and so on and so forth. Such that in one record, you're not talking about a daily operation, and then in the next, you put a value for the week, and then in the other, you put the monthly value. No, we have to define, is it a daily, a weekly, a monthly, and this has to be consistent in all the source systems that we are looking at in order to ensure that we have clarity and everything is in place. So are there questions about the indicators of high quality data? Structural, please. Okay, when we talk about a structure, we are just looking at what is the composition of a given data item. If I asked you to give me your name, yeah, I would like Gerald. What is your name? Unmute and tell me what your name is. Gerald? Okay, can I have a volunteer to unmute?
I'm Semiingo Godfrey.
Okay, Semiingo Godfrey has given us his name. Semiingo Godfrey, stay unmuted so that I ask the second question. What is your first name?
Godfrey.
And what is your surname?
Semiingo.
Do you have a middle name?
No?
Okay, so by structure, we expect that every time we are asked for a name, people by default have a first name and a surname. Others call it their last name. Okay? So here we have an example of Semiingo Godfrey. I am Amiyo, but I have a middle name. So if you needed to get the name of a staff or a student, thank you, Godfrey, you need to define the structure. Do you want just the first name and the surname, or do you want to have a first name, a middle name, and a last name? Define what is the structure of a name that you're looking for. The other example I gave us is when you are looking at address, say a postal address, define the structure. The postal address, I want the box number and the street. Or you can say, I want the box number, the city where it is held, and the country. So you need to define what are those individual components that are making up the structure of a given data item. Is it clear now? No way. Is it clear? Okay. When he gives us feedback, we'll be able to know. Any other questions? Okay. So the other thing that I'd like us to discuss is if we know that these are the indicators of high quality data, what do you think then are the problems that arise or the common data quality problems that we can have intuitively? What problems do we usually see in data and systems that you have interacted with? What quality problems have you encountered? Aloro? Joseph? Benjamin? The systems you worked with are always perfect. None. Okay, thank you, Jesse. A correct data format like date and time. Okay, I think I understand what you mean. The format in which that date should be, whether is it day, month, year, or year, month, and day. They're usually different arrangements of that date. So this can be problematic if we haven't defined its structure well. Okay, we have duplicate data, which is correct, hidden data, especially when you're looking at Excel. Some people hide the fields, so you keep wondering. Okay, great. Thank you, Innocent and Rhoda and Jesse for your contributions, as well as Job. So we have inaccurate data, and then Aloro tells us about data redundancy. Thank you for your contributions. Okay. So some of the problems that we are looking, in addition to what has been mentioned, we have dummy fields, incomplete data, very correct, and Nakato. Dummy values. I know we are at a stage where we haven't done a lot of programming, but you have done some. I'm just curious to know whether in those simple applications that you came up with, how many of us wanted to test whether data can actually be input in the database, and you put values that didn't necessarily make sense? By a show of hands. I'll give you an example. You created a form that takes in a name and the name of an individual, and you wanted to test whether it's actually being stored in a database. And so you put values like XXX, YYY, ZZZ, anything that, as long as it's an input. How many of us have done this? Only one person? Okay, All right. Only 3 of us. Okay. Thank you, Sadat. Okay. All right. So 5 of us from 5 of... Now, among the 5, let me ask the second question. The 6 of us, or the 7 of us, including myself, I would like to ask, how many of you remember to go back and clean up when you wanted to finally submit? Did you remember to go and delete that data so that you put in right data? Okay, the hands have gone reducing. I'm imagining. Yes, Elisa.
No.
Share with us the joke. Did you remember or you did not? Okay, Hamza did not. What about Elisa? So most times people forget to go and clean up, and that data that we have just been discussing is what we are referring to as dummy values. This is input that you put in. It's not necessarily correct, but you just wanted to be able to check that there is connection and we can actually capture data. And when we forget it, it becomes dummy. That simply means it goes together with the other data and it causes. When they ask for the number of records, it will still be counted and so lead to a wrong perspective. And therefore, many times, many programmers tend to forget the dummy values. And this is one of the most common problems. And so we need to look out for it and ensure that after implementation, clean up your DB such that we don't have such information that doesn't really make sense. Absence of data values, one of us talked about incomplete data, which is very true. At some point, it may not seem necessary. However, as time goes on, if you wanted to study trends, you realize that you have a missing link. So when we talk about demographic data, it could be information about how many female, male, age, such things. If those values are not considered as mandatory, it simply means at some point when you want to know, hey, how many female students did we have in the BIST class? If you never captured that information or it was never enforced as being compulsory for submission, you will never be able to get the right analysis. Unofficial use of fields, this we already made mention of, is where you put values. You use a field to store information. Yes, it may be the same data type, but it is not the expected input. I gave an example of an email as compared to an address. So it's accepting any kind of character, and therefore you end up having an expected input. Contradicting values, this is where related fields have data that is not compatible. An example is if you said you stay in Kampala, and then when asked the country, instead of having the country as Uganda, you have it as Kenya. That means it's totally contradicting, and therefore that data has an issue. You can question the quality of the data. So we are saying fields that are related should never have contradicting data. Another challenge is about violating business rules, and this I have explained to you. Business rules are just policies or restrictions that are set by a given organization. An example here is where a student registers for a semester that actually does not exist. We said if you try to register for semester 4, and yet the university actually has only 3 semesters, say that's semester 1, 2, and now recess time. If another example is if you are in a bank loan system and the minimum interest rate cannot be more than the maximum rate. You cannot define your minimum interest rate as being higher than what actually it should be. Another quality problem is inconsistent values based on the convention. If you remember, we talked about clarity being an indicator of high quality data, where you need to define you need to be able to define the convention that you are following. So in systems where codes are used, it is important to be very clear on what code is going to be used to represent a particular data item. If it is gender, are we using M and F, or are we using the actual words male and female? The example here is on different words. If we want to have auto to mean automatic, are we using AU or we are using A? And so on and so forth. It is important to be clear on what codes are being used. Incorrect values. This is where you have instances where you satisfy the data type. However, the value that is applied does not accurately describe our instance of an entity. The example we have here is where you have a student named John Mary Subuga. This is a male. However, the whole given to him is Mary Stewart. This definitely raises questions because they are related values and therefore there is inaccuracy. You are not describing the right. John Mary has not been described accurately or correctly when it comes to the whole of residence. And therefore, those are some of the examples as compared to we have other people who had given us other examples of troubles or problems that you can have, like the redundancy and inaccurate data. And so we need to be able to know that when we are cleaning up data, it takes a lot of time and effort. If you don't want to do it, you need to ask yourself, if I don't clean up the data, what is the cost? What are the implications of having this data in the state that it is in? Is it going to cost me having incomplete data now, or it will not? You may not feel that pinch currently, that you have not included demographic, the gender, and the age. You haven't been moved. But at a later stage when you're doing decision making, it becomes it becomes difficult. So it is important to note the cost attached to poor quality of data will be able to help you to justify the need for ensuring that we clean up our data and ensure that it is of quality, because it is the basis of decisions. And if we make decisions based on poor quality data, it means even our forecasts, our predictions may not be right, and therefore you will lose opportunities. And when you lose opportunities, that simply means you will not have made the money that you thought that you would make from a given investment, and therefore you would have losses that you have encountered. So I would like to, this is a small list. It is not a complete list of the kind of costs that are attached to poor quality data. The bad decisions, of course, may lead to litigations, that is lawsuits, where somebody says, I was illegally chased away from my career, and yet the truth is the lecturer gave me wrong marks, and there is evidence on that. And so that is a terrible scenario. So Makeri, in some cases, has had to pay for such kind of cases where there has been evidence of a bad decision. Lost opportunities because of dated data, where you have a strain and an overhead because the data is not clean enough. Fines, audit problems, redundant data, inconsistent reports, and even the time and effort used to correct the data once you get an error is actually expensive. So it is important to bear in mind that if you choose not to do it now, it will catch up with you at a later stage. So we have two categories of data cleansing tools. When we look at data quality tools, and we are simply saying these are, when you talk about a data quality tool, it's a software or a tool that enables you to identify or to discover errors. Reason being, we have noted that we want to be able to ensure that our data is of high quality. And once we are able to identify that there is an error in our data, can we be able to correct it in time such that the costs that we have seen previously, we don't have to go through them? So when we look at cleansing, we look at it in twofold. One, can we be able to discover the errors that were made in the source data? What are those inaccuracies? Where are the inconsistencies? And once we identify or to discover them, can we be able to fix them using the data correction tools, whereby you will have a set of algorithms which will go through the data, be able to transform and match which is correct, which one is not correct, and at the end of the day, be able to correct the data based on other related data. So looking at the error discovery tools, we are saying these enable you to identify the inaccuracies and inconsistencies based on the features that they have. And some of these features include: one, they are able to identify duplicate data. If they can know that this is duplicate data, that simply means there is an issue with the entity integrity. So once we identify duplicate, we want to be able to check what are the allowable values, which of these should actually be unique, And then we are able to address it, see where the challenge came about. Then identify it also, they also have features to identify items whose values are out of range from the attribute domain that you defined. And then we are able to also find inconsistent data, then reconcile referential integrity aspects. And once we have been able to identify these things, can we be able to come up with a report that tells you these are the trends of your quality? So discovery is about just identifying the issues in the data, where the duplicates, where is the inconsistency, where is data that shouldn't be in terms of the domain. That means you're out of the domain. So these aspects help you to discover those inconsistencies. While the correction, on the other hand, once we have been able to see these are the issues in our data, the correction tools provide us means, one, to be able to go through the data to transform, match those different items that should actually be the same. However, there is inconsistency, then we consolidate and correct the data. And so it provides tools to enable normalizing that inconsistent data, to merge the data that needs to be merged, to group related data, and validate the allowable values, because you have a domain, attribute domain. So we keep checking and saying, this one is out of range, this one. And then we start correcting, ensuring that you are within the allowable values. And at the end of the day, it also helps us to measure different data quality aspects. We have different examples. This is not a total list, but you can be able to do a Google search to review and see what are the examples of different data quality tools that are out there, in addition to the ones that we have looked at. I remember giving us the assignment of looking at a data administrator's role and the tools they are in. And one of the tools that we commonly looked at or found out is actually the database management system itself. So database management systems are also data quality tools. However, I would like to just go through the process involved in addressing the problems that may be identified using the discovery tools. So the correction tools, one will pass and standardize. This is where you look at the different text fields and want to be able to look at the formatting and ensure that they are based on industry standards or standards that have already been defined in the business rules. So keep looking at the content, the format, and the rules that have been set. So once that is done and we identify those aspects that are out of place, then we cleanse. In other words, we modify the values to ensure they meet the restrictions, both that have been defined in industry and that is in the technology, as well as the business rules. We want to make sure that you are not violating the rules, that you are working within the specified rules. Once that is done, those that need to be matched are identified and linked together to make related entries, so that we are able to look at, for example, if in one system I am Mercy Amiyo and in another system I'm Mercy Rebecca Amiyo, let's look at all the other attributes. If they are similar, it simply means the name in one place was updated and the other one wasn't. And so we can merge this record to ensure that everywhere, rather than Mercy Amiyo per se, we will have Mercy Rebecca Amiyo. And in that case, you will have matched and corrected. We also look at profiling, where you analyze the data to capture statistics to give you a better understanding on the kind of data that you have. And in this case, you'll be able to identify which particular data quality issues exist. In other words, are there certain, how would I say, did we not capture some information? And if we didn't, that simply means we can't answer certain queries. So it is important for us either say, send out an email for everybody to submit their phone numbers, because we have very few of them. So people will submit and you populate and you're able to complete your data. Maybe at the time you began the organization, people did not have identity cards, and the new people have the NIN number captured, others don't have it. What can we do to address this issue? Let's issue a circular that everybody should be able to submit their NIN. And as it comes in, it fills into the database and makes it complete. So this is an example of profiling, analyzing to capture statistics. How many people have, how many people don't have? Can we answer all the questions? If we can't, what can we do to mitigate this particular issue? And of course, we keep on monitoring. Keep doing checks to see conformity to business rules as well as integrity rules. In that way, we will be able to achieve our goal of data quality. At the end of the day, you may want to enrich what you have. As I mentioned, based on profiling, you can be able to come up with means and ways of completing the data, and that is known as enrichment. So looking at the DBMS, and all those aspects that we have just looked of, going through the data, identifying issues therein, being able to enrich it. We are saying that the database itself is used as a data quality tool. Reason being, it can prevent errors from happening by enforcing the different integrity constraints. It has features to ensure this, and you can also be able to enrich your data through the aspects that it provides. One, the domain integrity, where you define what are the limits or the allowable values that you expect. So anytime a user is inputting data, the integrity checker, if you remember the components of the DBMS, checks to see, is this value within the domain or not? If it is not, then we throw it out. Don't accept that particular record. Is this, when you look at the primary key column, are you providing a unique value or not? If it is duplicate, throw out. If you have a foreign key in the record being input and the value does not match any of the values in the reference column, throw it out. So here we are saying both domain and entity integrity checks are being done to ensure that we have data that is of quality. We have update security, where we looked at this last week and we talked about authorization and authentication, and this is where it falls, ensuring that we only have authorized people working in the system. And secondly, only updates that are authorized actually occur. In other words, it works hand in hand with the integrity checker. If you want to be able to input data, we need to ensure, one, that you are authorized to do it, and secondly, you may be authorized to use the system, but not to input. So we don't allow your updates. As long as it is massive, no. If it is the head of department, yes, accept. So update security is also provided for by the DBMS. I've been able to describe or to discuss the entity integrity checking. Missing of values, we ensure this by enforcing the not null constraint to ensure that mandatory fields always have data. Referential integrity, I have also discussed this previously. And lastly, we have the conformity to business rules. And I mentioned last week that here we make use of triggers and stored procedures. These are just scripts that are written and compiled. They are stored in the DB itself such that when a particular event occurs, you are able to initiate the trigger or the stored procedure. So we are saying these will be practically addressed within your practical session. So I've mentioned it here for you to be able to once again know that they exist, but we will handle it in depth in the practical session. Any questions to that level before we address the last aspect of today's topic? No questions? Okay. So when we look at data quality management, we have looked at what data quality is. We are saying, how do we manage this? How do we make sure that our data really is of quality? How do we make sure that we have updates that are based or satisfy the different business rules, the integrity rules, the referential integrity rules? How do we make sure that we don't have contradicting values, that we have complete data, and so on and so forth? We are saying, one, it's going to be a joint effort within the organization. That means all departments, whether you're just a user or a data entrant, everybody has a responsibility. And it is important to take it upon yourself that quality of the data depends on me as an individual. If that's the mindset of people in the organization, then you can be sure that people will take keen note not to misuse different fields, and they will be obeying or working within the defined business rules. In addition to this, that simply means that you need to establish and deploy the roles, the responsibilities, the policies, the procedures that relate to, one, how do we acquire the data? How do we maintain it? How do we disseminate it? And how do we disposition that data. How do we get it? Mainly looks at the collection and storage. Maintenance looks at how do we update it, what do we accept to happen, by whom, blah, blah, blah. Dissemination is about who gets to see it, how do we disseminate it, in what form should we disseminate it. So all the rules and procedures need to fall under these 4 aspects. So that means business and technology become a partner or have a partnership where the business provides the rules and the technologies provide support to acquire, maintain, disseminate, and dispose the electronic data assets in the organization, the database management systems, the network security aspects, and the rules in the organization help the users to ensure they will capture the data rightly, update it correctly, disseminate it well, and if they are to destroy or delete or to dispose of the data, there are set rules. For example, here in Makere, they will keep exam script for a certain period of time without destroying them. For audit purposes, and in case there are issues to be addressed, we need their policies of how long they should be kept and what to do with that data thereafter. So it means in data quality, you must have both proactive and reactive elements. Proactive is how do we prevent data quality problems, and reactive is in case they happen, what steps should we take to restore the quality of our data? So in proactiveness, we are saying we need to establish the entire governance, the hierarchy of roles and responsibilities, who is in charge of what, and then create the quality expectations in the strategies, in the policies, and so on and so forth. Be able to have everybody know this is what our quality expectations are. We don't expect you to do A, B, and C. We expect you to input data correctly, be keen, look through your data before you make the final press of the button to make it permanent. And then we also have to implement technology or platforms that will support our business practices. In terms of reactiveness, we are saying we should be able to know how to manage issues of where data is located and other issues that arise. Here is if data is corrupted, how should we actually address it and correct it? All these aspects should be catered for in the reactive mode. So we mainly have 4 roles that can be defined in the data quality governance, and that is where we have the program manager or project leader, the person who is in charge of it. We have the organization change agent, whereby you are in charge of getting people in the organization to feel they are a part of data quality, that they have a role to play, being able to talk and influence people to accept this aspect of change in terms of all of us have something to contribute to ensuring that our data is of quality and managing it that way. We have the business analyst and the data analyst. This is where most IT or computing people fall, where the business analyst's role is to compare the business requirements, which include the data quality requirements, while the data analyst's role is to look at those requirements, put them in a data model to ensure we can acquire the data and deliver it in a safe mode, in a quality mode. And that will include the maintenance, the dissemination, and the disposition. If you were to delete, what needs to be done. So this business analyst and data analyst, those are the kind of jobs that really fall for us as people doing BIST. This is where we mainly fall, because you are integrating technology together with business to achieve the requirements in an organization. The data steward, on the other hand, is responsible for caring for the data asset. This one is another word for a data manager. If you remember, a data manager is a person who knows about the data within an organization. So it is paramount that when we talk about governance and proactiveness, that this set of people, it may not be that you have these distinct roles in the organization. However, you have somebody responsible for each of these aspects within the organization. And I have already mentioned this, but in a positive manner, that one of the major issues that arise in data quality management is because, one, people give it little time, and then everyone thinks it is not their responsibility. So it is important for us to note that everyone in the organization has a part to play, and therefore follow the rules, the regulations that have been set, and have a positive mind to give it your best right from the beginning, such that if we input data of quality at the beginning, the amount of time and resources that you need to clean it at a later stage actually reduce. So know data quality is important, give it enough time and resource, but have a mindset in the organization that it depends on everybody. Everyone has a part to play to ensure that the organization has reliable data. Do we have any questions with regard to data quality management? And there was silence in the class. Tabitha, are you okay? All right, I will use the last 2 minutes of our time together to go back to the question I asked earlier on. Are we okay meeting on the 8th to do the presentation of our assignment? I proposed to us as a class, I would like to send out a schedule. I'm putting up assignment 1. And I would like to hold the presentations next week on Tuesday. Yes, Abel, it is Women's Day, and the good thing is I am a woman. So I would like to spend my time with us on the 8th Nakato says not 8th. It will not be. I don't know what Vincent is meaning by O-U-K. It is online, and all I need to do is, all I need of you, that's why I want to put a schedule such that each group will spend with me only 15 to 20 minutes. I just need 15 to 20 minutes of your time on the 8th, the 24 hours that you have on that day. I am requesting for 15 to 20 minutes, such that you come online as a group, present your work, and we call it a day. That's all that is required of you. So we have Nakato, who is not available, okay. The other people, let's do this with a show of your hand on, just raise your hand if you are okay with it. Nakato, I am a woman. I told you I am a woman. And imagine you're giving me 20 minutes of your time, and I'm giving you a whole day. So let's not go the gender way. Let us just go with whether you're for it or not. And we keep in the safe zone. Okay, so I have 10 hands up, 11. I have only 11 hands. "14 out of the 30. I will stop the, I don't even have half of the class. Okay, I'm going to assume that the 14 can represent the 7 groups that exist in this class. Patrick, you don't need to raise 2 hands. One is just enough. If you don't make it, well, that is too bad. But as I have said, I just need 20 minutes of your time. So we will start the presentations at 9. I will be online. Just come in at your time slot, present your work, and off you go to celebrate the women in your life. So thank you for your participation today. I will shortly be putting up the assignment for us to spend the afternoon and the rest of the week doing it, such that by Tuesday, we are ready and we spend the 15 minutes. Nakato's group can spend 5, and we shall all be well. I'd like you to have a blessed day and see you on Tuesday. Yes, Nakato, come and we do 5. Are we going to do in order? Tabitha, I'm going to give you the schedule and you'll be able to give it to the people. You will look at it, and each group has a time slot for which you need to come online and be able to present. Thank you, Sadat. All right, everybody, have a good afternoon. Enjoy your lunch.